Welcome to the Multimedia Podcast. About a year ago, I started organizing a series of guest interviews and lectures on campus in which I would get some people from industry to come in and speak to the multimedia students about what their jobs entail and some tips that they have for students that are entering the industry for the first time. I realized when I was studying that I actually had no idea what it actually meant to enter the working world, and it was quite a wake-up call when I finally did. So I thought these interviews would be helpful to help give students a series of handholds and skills and guides and tips so that they would know what to expect when they finally start their first job. And so that they would have a bit more of an indication of what to prepare themselves for in the particular job line that they would like to go into. So with the move of everything online, I've decided to convert those guest lectures that used to happen on campus into a podcast format, which makes them firstly more accessible, and it makes it easier for me to interview a lot more people than before. It also makes it possible for me to speak to people who have moved overseas and who they've graduated from the multimedia degree and moved overseas, and we get some insights from them on what it's like to work as a multimedia graduate in other countries. So each episode is going to feature an interview with someone working in a field that is relevant to the multimedia degree. So they may be working in South Africa or anywhere else. There's no set requirement. And my goal isn't for each interview to be exactly the same, but to get a really deep understanding of what each individual person does in their job and how they've experienced the industry, some tips that they can give you as students, skills that they think are really helpful to have, things that they wish they knew, advice they would love to give to people, and anything that would help a new multimedia student entering the industry. Along the way, I might add in some bonus episodes, some group interviews, whatever comes up, we'll find a way to put it in. So I aim to speak to a broad variety of people: game developers, web developers, software developers, user experience designers, anything along those lines, anything that a multimedia student would be able to do once they graduate. Along with that, I'd also like to try to organize to speak to some people who can give insights into how you can become a better web designer, how you can learn more about color and design, and creating really good looking designs on websites and on things like Adobe software. So we'll add in some of those in between as well. So I hope that you find these episodes helpful. You are welcome to send me suggestions, tips, ways that you think it can be improved, people you'd love to hear from. You are welcome to do that if you think that you have specific advice to give. So jumping right into the first episode, where I spoke to Matt Benic, who is a computer science graduate from the University of Pretoria with almost 20 years of experience in the industry, specifically in game development. So we spoke a lot about what it's like to work in the game development industry in South Africa, how the industry has grown, some organizations you can be aware of if you're interested in going into game development, as well as VR development, which is what Matt is currently working in. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Cool. So I just want to start off by saying thanks so much for being willing to join me and share your wisdom, because I think you have lots to share, given the little bit of a squiz that I've taken at your LinkedIn profile, I think will be really helpful for the students. So I really appreciate it. So the first question getting started is, you studied computer science at Tux quite a while ago, it seems. And what made you decide to go into game development after the computer science?
I suppose what makes most people want to do it. I was a gamer growing up, and through varsity I got access to the internet for the first time, which obviously in those days was a bit of a rarity, and I was able to deep dive into the sort of body of knowledge that was starting to build up on game development at the time. It was something that wasn't easily accessible otherwise. So there's a site that's still around today called Gama Sutra, and I printed out reams of that using the university's resources, and that got me interested in the actual development side of it. It's not something I had any idea of before, and we had some opportunities to work on graphics. Demos and things like that in practicals at University of Pretoria, and that got me interested as well. And at the time, the industry here was a lot smaller than it is now, but there was a company that had started up by a South African who went overseas, studied at DigiPen, and came back. And he started up essentially what was supposed to be sort of a AAA studio. And I was lucky enough to, first of all, find out about them through one of the gaming magazines at the time, and secondly, get an opportunity to interview with them, and I got the job.
Sure.
And yeah, that's where it started.
Okay. And did it live up to your expectations, going in wanting to be a game designer or game developer?
Game developer. I'm definitely not a designer. I think it's. I don't know what expectations I had at the time. Like you said, it was a long time ago. It was definitely a fun experience. It was, there was always new things to learn. The people were typically were geeks as well. So it was sort of a meeting of minds. It was enjoyable. It was definitely enjoyable.
And you were primarily a coder there.
100%. I've my entire career has been programming. I'm not an artist by any stretch. Back in those days, I think there was less of an overlap. With tools today like Unity and Unreal Engine, it's a lot easier than before to sort of step on both sides. I think, particularly coming from an artist's point of view, I think you sort of get eased into code quite well, because you'll start writing the odd script in Unity, and over time you'll sort of pick up more and more advanced topics, and I think it's probably a lot easier for an artist to sort of move into the code direction than the other way around. I mean, if you don't have an artistic bone in your body, then there's not really much you can do to change that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So it seems like since then you've sort of stuck around in the industry, got a bit of varied experience at a bunch of different companies. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Where you went, what you did, what you learned?
Yeah, sure. So my experience has been pretty mixed. I've probably spent a little under half of it in actual game development, as in entertainment game development. And other than that, I've worked for simulation companies, so military simulation, mining simulation, and gambling software as well. The skills that are used in game development are immediately transferable to those industries. There were various reasons for that. I think the one is you have to be realistic about game development's sort of history of abuse of its employees. Unfortunately, it has very, very high expectations of employees in terms of how much of your life is dedicated to work. And at some point, you kind of, some people do, some people don't, but you may reach a point where you decide that you'd rather have a little bit more time to yourself and your family than what the typical game development career allows.
So would you say that that's not as true for just a developer, or it's more true for game development than it is just for development?
I think, look, it can be true for developers. I think there's definitely non-game development companies out there that are willing to take more than their pound of flesh. But I think with the fact that programming is such a widely used skill, there's enough competition for your employment for you to be able to choose and say, look, I'd prefer not to work for a company that doesn't take my work-life balance seriously.
Okay. So there's freedom to choose.
Exactly. I think the smaller, it also depends on, the reality is that games are very much a passion industry, and you'll see the same in any passion industry, whether it's fine arts, whether it's an acting career, whether it's entertainment in general. If there's a certain amount of passion involved, people are prepared to do a lot more and sacrifice a lot more, and the competition tends to be a lot fiercer. So there are fewer positions, and you just have to work that much harder and be prepared to give up that much more.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And then also, you mentioned that obviously when you started, the game industry was quite different to how it is now. Can you speak a little bit about that? How has it changed? Has it grown?
It's definitely grown locally. There's a fair number of companies around. We've had some really good successes. We've had the likes of Free Lives down in Cape Town. We've had the Brotherhood, who've also since moved to Cape Town. And quite a few more. We've got a really strong outsourcing technical studio here in Joburg called 24-bit, and then lots of sort of smaller indies around the country as well. We don't really have any AAA studios here, which is a pity. I think it would be nice to have that mix, but we do have a very strong indie industry. And it leads to an interesting character, and there's definitely interest from larger studios in South Africa. A couple of years, so we have a representative organization in South Africa. And I'm actually blanking out on it.
Like a game organization that like.
Yes, I'm gonna. AISA, independent.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll have to look it up. I'm sorry, I'm actually blanking now.
No, okay.
And they've done some awesome work. Among other things, they've organised what's now become an annual conference down in Cape Town.
What's it called?
Make Games Africa.
Okay.
And it's attended by international representatives. There are speakers from overseas. Obviously, most of the local industry goes as well, and that gives a lot of opportunities for networking, and for people to show off their interactive entertainment South Africa. There we go. Excuse me.
Okay.
That gives people a lot of opportunities to sort of expand their horizons quite a bit. There are also a lot of guys locally that end up going to things like GDC. But obviously the cost involved there for a local is quite prohibitive.
Okay, so it sounds like it's growing, which is promising, I think.
Yes, no, I think it is growing. It's at an interesting point now where I think we'd really benefit from sort of one big employer coming in. We've got a good pipeline of students coming out. We have a couple of good programs in the country, and we've got a couple of really good indie employers, and we've had a couple of good hits, which obviously helps bring more interest, which is great.
Okay, sounds promising. Actually, it's more than I thought, so that's good. I want to ask you a bit about your work at Luma. I'm unclear about whether it's an animation company or was an animation company or what's happened there and what you were doing there. It sounds really interesting. Sounds a bit different to games, but maybe you can clarify.
So Luma's actually, Luma is and has been a group of companies. Primarily, Luma Animation is a local animation studio. They do work for film, for advertising. They do a lot of international work. A lot of their work, if you had to look at their portfolio, you'd recognize it as a local. There's a lot of the stuff in sort of local ads and things like that you would have seen. Excuse me. But they're also involved in some other things. Is Luma Interactive that has a partnership with another company that does specifically does. They do visualization for virtual sports. So wow. It's a new thing here. I think it's just become legal here, but internationally, it's possible to bet on simulated sports. So this is something that's popular in quite a few regions where. It works very much like any other gambling system. It'll generate some random number, and based on that random number, you'll see a visualization. Except in this case, what you see is a simulated horse race, or a simulated kart race, or a car race, or something like that. And it uses typical gaming technology, as in game development for entertainment games technology. Our engine was in Unity, and it looks like, I mean, if you had to see the TV in a smoky bar in a corner, you could quite easily be fooled into thinking you were watching a live horse race. Wow. So it's quite convincing. And then the reason I joined Luma originally was at one stage they had another partner company called Luma Arcade, and they made games for a couple of things. They made some advergaming titles. They partnered with overseas companies to do a couple of things. So, they did a really impressive advergaming solution for Mini, full-on 3D racing, that sort of thing. And then I joined them to start doing work for when Microsoft released their line of phones. We did one of the launch titles for that, a really impressive game called The Harvest. We moved on from that through a couple of things. I think the biggest release that I worked on for Luma, other than The Harvest, was Blade Slinger, another mobile game. Okay. But then soon after that, I stopped working on Luma Arcade stuff, and I moved over to work on the gambling solutions.
Okay. And
long story.
The developing a game via like coding for a game, how is that different to just development? I mean, I don't know if I can clarify this question. Like, what's the difference in the work, if that makes sense?
The work
more
is
interesting,
quite
or is it
different.
the same?
It's different. It's interesting in different ways. Game development is always going to be fairly visual. So everything that you work on has a clear visual output, which is always really rewarding. You know, you make a change to some underlying system, and you sort of do a test in the game, and you see the effects of what you've done. You know, you build up a teleport system, and you hop over and try the actual teleport, and you know you work on a particle system, and you see what it looks like in game, and everything's real time. So everything that you're doing from a programming point of view has an impact every frame that's run in the game. You know, you want your game to be performant, so absolutely everything you do has some effect on how well that game performs, the frame rate you're going to hit, that sort of thing. The other types of development, I mean, like for example, I'm working on a web project at the moment. That's very different. It's very much an event-driven process where a user's going to click on something. It's going to cause a change in the system. You're going to refresh the view, and that's it. It's going to sit and wait for the user to do something. You still have performance considerations. Obviously, you don't want user to sit there and wait for a couple of minutes while their page refreshes. But to me, that kind of feels like the biggest difference. And then I think there's still, at least when it comes to sort of building games for mobile and building games for PC and consoles and stuff like that, not sort of more web-oriented games, I find it a little bit, it's a lot simpler in terms of how it's put together. If you're working on web projects, the back end is complicated, the front end is complicated, how those two work together, how many other systems it's talking to, that kind of thing. There's a lot more glue involved. So those are some of the differences. These days, specifically with game development as well, you most likely to be working with one of the established engines, be it Unity or Unreal, and some of the other smaller ones that are coming up. So there's less of this building a stack of different technologies that you're going to work on top of. You basically take that one tool and you do the best job that you can with it.
And you obviously work hand in hand with a game developer, game designer then, or how does that work? Who designs the game?
That process is going to vary depending on the size of the teams. I think your indie teams, you're going to find they are mostly quite small. It's not uncommon for it. I mean, you'll find the single-man teams where he's doing everything. He's doing the art, he's doing the development, he's doing the design. I think most of the teams are a little bit bigger than that, and very often you'll have a standalone designer, but your developers and your artists will have a lot more influence on design as well because the team is so much smaller. Whereas if you look at the big AAA studios, if you had to go and work for one of Ubisoft's studios, short of being a design director or an art director, you're going to have very little influence on the direction the game takes. You very much are receiving a spec. I mean, it might not be a technical spec, it might just be a description, and you have to fit that. If you're an artist, there's going to be a design Bible. You're going to be following that. You don't get to come in and say, okay, sure, the look of the game is fine for everybody else, but I'm going to do something completely different for this. There'll be a definite design philosophy that they're following, and so on. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. I guess in the industry of South Africa, the fact that there's so many indie companies, if you are a game designer, you're probably doing a little bit more bit of everything sort of thing. It sounds like you're not just going to be designing the game. You're probably involved in the arts and the UX or whatever.
It's harder on a small team like that to justify people being quite as specialized. And I mean, that carries out to not just design, but other things as well. If you're on a small team, you're going to be a generalist programmer. You're going to be coding all sorts of things. Whereas in your larger teams, it's not uncommon to have someone who is focused on graphics programming or AI programming, or something really, really focused. And the same with artists. Your small teams are going to expect an artist to be able to do multiple things. You're not just going to be a modeler or a texturer or a rigger, you're probably going to have some, if not all of those skills.
Yes. Okay. I think moving on from there to your current role at Business Science Corporation. It sounds like you're involved in virtual reality there, which sounds very interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So virtual reality is playing a bigger and bigger role these days in training in a lot of industries. So specifically, there are industries where it's either too expensive or too dangerous for trainees to interact with equipment or to go into settings where maybe there's high temperatures they have to deal with. Maybe there's a risk of electrocution. There's those sorts of things, and there's a lot of value in having somebody go through the experience virtually first, see if they have any weak areas, train that sort of behavior into them so that they do things right. It's also quite useful to be able to sort of show past errors, right? So things that have gone wrong, you can simulate those things and show people, look, this is what happens. And you can also do some pretty, you can illustrate possible risks really well. You can show somebody if you don't fasten this, like you can see what happens to somebody. They fall down and they lose a limb or something like that. It can be quite gruesome. So it's largely around that, and in BSC's case, it's the bulk of our work is around mining and heavy machinery and heavy industry. But there are some other things as well. Some sort of we've done some work for sort of medically related things. Pain management, stress management, that kind of thing. Sort of more meditative experiences.
Sure, sounds interesting.
And yeah, we also use Unity, so it shows you how sort of widely applicable that is. We use a range of target hardware and all sorts of things. We play with all sorts of cool toys. Yeah.
So, if I can just ask, why Unity and not Unreal? It's probably a matter of preference. The team that I've joined was already a Unity team by the time I joined, and I think in this country one of the big benefits to Unity is just that there are more Unity skills around. It's easier to hire people that know Unity simply because there are more people that know Unity. I think Unreal's slowly gaining or is pretty quickly gaining ground. I think that might change. I think it'll very much depend on sort of what people are teaching at the different institutions. We've typically at Luma and now also at BSC, we've hired from one of the institutions that trains specifically in Unity, and those graduates have sort of spread all over the country as well. But I mean, if another program had to sort of start churning out really good graduates in Unreal, maybe that'll influence a change. I don't know. There are definitely companies locally that are using Unreal. It's not all Unity, but there's a good number of Unity devs around and a good number of Unity shops. And then your role in this? Are you're the back end programmer for these VR applications?
I wouldn't say back end. I think the team is small enough that we're generalists. So anything that needs to be written, I'll write. And the stuff we write is some of it's on PC, some of it's on sort of the mobile driven headsets. But pretty much all of it is directly on the device. So there's a little bit of back end work, like recording people's scores and things like that. But the bulk of it is essentially the same as building a game. It's just making the engine do what you want it to do. Programming the systems that drive the visual that you're going to see. That drive user behavior, react to user behavior. Like I said, teleporting systems, interaction systems, things like that.
Okay. And the technology you use there, I mean, I'm guessing it's dependent on the client. So Vives, Oculus, what do you mainly work with?
It depends. Yeah, it depends on the client needs. Look, the Vives, so we've used Vives for most things in the past, just because of sort of the quality that we can get out of it. We have started using the Quest as well. And we do have a product that we run on both the Quest and the Go, because it's based on 360 camera images instead of sort of rendering the whole world. And in that case, we can get away with it. The thing is, they've both got benefits. The Vives are great quality wise. You've got a nice beefy PC behind it.
Yeah.
But the Quest is really nice in terms of not having to worry about setting up trackers, and just the pure portability is really helpful. And lately we've actually started looking at using the Quest for both, because we can tether the Quest to a PC,
yes,
and run the
true.
application on PC, and we get the best of both worlds. So if the client wants some of their stuff to run on the headset, we can do that, and some of the stuff we can run on PC.
Wow. Okay. That sounds cool. With regards to VR in South Africa, do you think, is it taking off? Is it not quite there yet? Is it worth a student learning these things before they graduate?
Yes. Look, it's always going to be, so game development is a smaller industry than development in general, and VR is a smaller industry than that. The big difference is, whereas with game development, you're very much tied to a game having to succeed commercially. You're sort of taking a risk. If you're going to build a game, you kind of hope that it does well on Steam or something like that. With VR, there are actual clients who have a need for it, that are going to pay to do the work. So as long as there's demand from the clients, there's going to be companies that are prepared to hire developers, and that's not just in training, that's in entertainment, and there's cool things like events that'll have a companion VR app, and AR as well. There's some of that as well. So yeah, it's an industry that I think has grown actually quite quickly. There is a local community as well that's quite active and headed by some really, really great people that try hard to sort of make sure everybody knows what's going on, and it's a healthy industry locally.
Okay, sure. Okay, that's good news actually, because it seems to be it's the way we're going at the university, teaching our honors students. They do quite a bit of VR dev, so it's good to know that that they get out there with some skills that they can actually use, which is cool. I wanted to ask you, having been in the industry for a while as a developer, what's some advice that you can give some newly graduated students that are looking to enter specifically the development industry? It doesn't have to be game development, but whatever you find appropriate.
Sure. I think the biggest thing you have to know going in is that whatever you know now is probably going to be obsolete a year from now. So your single most important skill is the ability to learn new stuff. That's going to change rapidly. Interestingly enough, the games industry has probably changed a little bit more slowly over the last couple of years than when I first got into it. The fact that there's the fact that there's sort of a couple of established tool chains has helped sort of calm that down a little bit. But at the same time, new hardware coming in, new devices like VR a couple of years ago, wasn't really an issue. So whatever you're going to be doing development-wise, you need to be prepared to learn. I think another important one is the value of working in teams. And I know a lot of people that get into development kind of get into it because they enjoy the ability of being able to get away from people and just do things by themselves. But the reality is, most places that you're going to work and most projects that you're going to work on, you will do better if you can have humility, if you can sort of understand that there are people out there that know more than you, and learn to work well with others. Like it's a trope, and everybody hates team assignments at varsity, but that's how you're going to work in the real world, right? And it's really, really important you learn that. You can be an absolute expert on something, but if nobody wants to work with you, you're not valuable to me as an employer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Most things happen in teams, I guess. It's
exactly
very rare that you're going to be working by yourself unless you're running your own company.
And look, the other thing of that is, you may find that one day you don't really want to program anymore. You may find that you're attracted to other things, and those are the kind of skills that are going to serve you no matter what. You can always learn a new programming language. That's and you're going to have to. But at the end of the day, your sort of interpersonal and your team skills, your soft skills are what's going to make you employable in a sort of broader sense. You definitely do need to focus on technical skills, and that's another one as well. Is particularly in the local industry, your portfolio is absolutely king.
Okay.
It doesn't help to sort of graduate and say, okay, now I'm going to start looking for a job. Oh, let me maybe work on some example work. If you want to get into the game industry, you should be doing projects on your own. When I say on your own, I mean at home to build up your skills. You should ideally be getting involved with the community and seeing if there are guys out there that want to join you on a project. Take part in game jams. Like the game jam culture that's around today is something that we didn't benefit from 20 years ago, and it's fantastic. It's a great way to really quickly grow your skills. It's a great way to really quickly grow your network of people that you can work with. Honestly, it's the best thing you can be doing is joining pretty much every game jam that comes up.
Okay, and learn to work in a team, I guess, because in a game jam
it'll help you with that as well. It'll absolutely help you with that as well.
Okay, so then going on that, what are your thoughts about someone wanting to study to become a game developer in South Africa? Is it a worthwhile pursuit?
I think it is, but I would also back it up with make sure that you also have skills that are transferable elsewhere. You may find that the same thing that a lot of people do. They think they want to make games because they enjoy making games. Sorry about the noise. The joys of working from home. You may find that once you realize what it takes to actually make games, it's not really what you want to do, and it helps to have skills that are transferable elsewhere. I think your programming skills are very helpful in that. A lot of the art skills are as well. So it's a great thing to get into a game development course and to pursue it because it's something you're passionate about. But when your folks tell you to have a backup plan, they're not kidding. Do that. Luckily, it just happens to be one of those where the skills can be used elsewhere.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Especially with VR, I guess taking off in game engines and.
Exactly. Yeah. Look, a technology degree is generally a useful one, and the fact that it happens to be tied to something you're passionate about is a bonus, right?
Yeah. And what would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned working in the development industry?
I think I'd have to say the biggest lesson I'm still trying to learn is balancing work and home life properly. When you work on stuff like we do that you actively enjoy, it's sometimes really hard to pull yourself away, and it's really hard to push too hard and burn yourself out. So on the soft side, I think that's the most important one. And then, like I said, the ability to learn new things, that's the most important thing.
On the work-life balance thing, any tips that you've figured out? I mean, I think as someone who's new in the industry, how do you go about just saying no? Do you just say no when, how does that work for someone who's new?
It's difficult, particularly when you're new, because you're trying to prove yourself. And the reality is there are going to be times. Look, you have to understand when to say no and when not to say no. There are going to be times when you have to put in extra hours to get the job done, and that's reasonable. But if you're being expected to do that every night, every weekend, every month, that's not acceptable. Your health has to come first, and that's not something you can get back. But look, when it comes to somebody who's younger as well, it's not just about work-life balance in the sense that I need to get away from programming and spend time doing something else. It's also that any time that you're focusing on a particular task, there's an opportunity cost to that, right? If you are doing nothing but working on your paid-for project 14 hours a day, you're not going to have the energy to go and build that indie project that keeps you passionate, right? And that could potentially get you to a point where you can make your own games for a living. So definitely learn when to say, like you say, I can't tell you when you have to say no and how to. It's one of those things you just have to learn. At some point, you know, and one of the important things to look out for is it affecting your health, or is it affecting your relationships?
Yeah.
If either of those, if the answer to either of those is yes, then it's time to reassess your priorities, and it might be time to start saying no to things.
Okay. No, that's helpful. I think, that's good life advice in general, but that's very helpful.
And like I say, I'm still learning, so.
Yeah. I think it's a lifelong thing. You just sort of get better at figuring these things out. I think you've already touched on this. Yeah, the skills you would say, I mean, you are a team leader in your capacity where you currently work, am I right? So, I mean, you've already spoken about someone being able to learn new things and being able to work in a team, but are there any other skills that you would say make someone more employable above someone else to work in your team?
Yes, so obviously the technical skills are a minimum, right? You do have to have the ability to do what I'm paying you to do. So all the stuff I said about soft skills, they matter, but without the technical skills, you're not going to get hired. Okay, so what is going to set you apart though is if I can see you're going to fit in well with the team, you get along well with people, you can take advice and criticism, but you can also give advice and criticism in a constructive way, right? I think most of us want to work in an environment where we feel we can contribute, and part of that is being able to give feedback and know that we're being heard. And again, the portfolio is a big thing. Like, that it's one thing to be able to show a qualification that in theory says you can do what you say you can do. But if you can actually demonstrate it with work that you've made, that you've created, that's definitely a winner. So I would say the three big things you've got to look at is, are you capable? Can you show that capability? And can you show that you're an effective team member? Like those are always going to be the three most important things.
Okay. And then your hiring process, does that involve a technical test of some sort? Or in general, when you're applying for a dev job, does that usually involve a technical test, or is it just based on your portfolio and an interview?
It'll obviously depend on the company. Some companies do issue a technical test. Some companies will ask you to. I'm fond of, given what we do, I'm fond of actually giving somebody a project and saying, a small project, and saying you have X amount of time to implement this. The nice thing with that to me is it gives me an idea of not just can somebody write code, but how do they organize things? How long does it take to do things? Can they stick to a specification? All those kinds of things. But yes, you'll definitely get some companies where you'll be expected to sit down and take a programming test. Some companies will just have a chat and see if you fit, and great. Some companies, the process can be quite onerous. It can be layers and layers of technical testing, interviews by technical staff. It very much varies. I think if a student's going to be applying to a particular job, and they definitely should, they should keep in mind where they want to work. Never be afraid to actually just contact the company where you want to work, and ask them for an interview. Don't, and this is a very genuine piece of advice, and it's something that I've actually seen a lot of, and it doesn't work. Do not get your parents to contact a company and ask them if they have a job for you. That says a lot of things to me. It says, first of all, it gives me the impression that your folks are the ones looking for the job and not for you. So you don't actually care. And secondly, it says to me that you can't do things yourself. And unfortunately, it also says that you might have confidence issues, which might be something that makes you difficult to hire. But yeah, don't be scared to decide on the companies you want to work for. Make a list of those companies. Obviously, don't assume you're going to get into your first choice. Don't expect that, right? Yeah. Pick a couple of companies, research them, find out what they're about, find out who the guys are that are in charge, or the people are that are in charge. Excuse me. Find out what their culture is like. You may think that there's a company that makes this great game, and you really loved it, and you want to work for them. But you do a little bit of digging and you find out that the culture there really isn't something you'd want to be involved in. Working for a company is a relationship, and it has to be good for both of you. So you want to know, where their focus is, what their culture is, and you should be able to find out. Ask people. Chances are somebody in your network that's maybe studied with you in the past, or that through a friend, has worked there or knows something about the interview process. Find out. Ask somebody what the interview process is like. All those sorts of things. Do your research.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sure. You've given so much helpful advice. I think the students will find this super helpful. I think that's the end of my list of questions. I want to say thank you so much for putting aside the time. I know working from home, it feels like there's never a gap between work and normal life. So I do appreciate you.
Very real challenge.
Yes.
It's a very real challenge.
I do appreciate you giving up your evening to do this. Thank you very much. And I'll let you know when it goes live and send you a link.
You're welcome, Benic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
You too. Cheers.